Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books. Today I have a review for you of Demon in White, Book 3 in the sci-fi sequence by Christopher Ruocchio. This is going to be a non-spoiler review, however I am going to be discussing plot elements from the previous two books and from the short stories and novellas if they come up. So that's Empire of Silence, Lesser Devil, Tales of Sonita Volume 1, Queen of Mid-Ashes, Howling Dark. So all 5 of those stories could be discussed within this video. I'll try and keep it light for the discussion of the novellas and short stories because I know not everyone has read those. Although you should, they're all good. In fact, they might be some of the best writing Ruocchio has done. But today we're just here to talk in a non-spoilery fashion about not Howling Dark, Demon in White. I have this lovely UK pink paperback that's lovely and floppy and that I extremely enjoyed reading from. I do have also the audiobook and the Kindle version of Demon in White, but I actually only read less than 50 or 60 pages with the Kindle version because this physical version was so nice to read from. So if you are thinking about picking yourself up a copy, the physical paperback is lovely to read from and I would really recommend it. But that's enough about a review of the physical book. Let's talk about the actual book. So first thing I'm going to talk about is kind of where we find Hadrian when the book begins. Next thing I'm going to discuss is the kind of characters, and then finally how I felt overall about the kind of story as a whole, I guess. And I'm going to give you the star rating at the end. So hope you're excited for that. Now, this book finds us with another time jump. So multiple of the Sonita books have time jumps because Hadrian has lived over 1500 years of his life, and we're getting the most important parts of his life, or the things that he feels, because the narrative is in the first person, as you know, because you've probably read the first 2 books and 3 short stories, blah, blah, blah. So Hadrian is giving us what he thinks is the most important, the most pertinent to tell the story he wants to tell about, one assumes, how and why he ate a son. So, first off, Hadrian has not eaten the son in the last 2 books, or short stories or novellas. So we are still, as this book begins, waiting for Hadrian to eat a son. He has been kind of brought back into the arms of the Solon Empire's society. So he has become a Knight Victorian, which means that he works directly for the Emperor, and he's kind of like the Emperor's boogeyman because, there's this myth coming from what happened on Vorgossos that not Vorgossos, the Demiurge, that he cannot be destroyed, cannot be killed. He has lost an arm that's been replaced by an extremely fancy prosthetic, and this comes up a lot. And he did actually die. So on the Demiurge, Hadrian is killed by Prince Aranata of the Cielcin, who are the alien antagonists in this book series. And just check the microphone there that it was recording, because I just realised I had not checked to see whether I turned it on or not. So Hadrian dies at the hands of Prince Aranata of the Cielcin, and then is kind of edited back into existence by the Quiet, which is this kind of ancient civilization that Hadrian believes is kind of shaping and guiding him to the savior, to be the savior of humanity, basically, to save humanity from the Cielcin. And they've given him visions, they've given him his life back, and there's a really interesting dynamic between the Quiet and Hadrian, and this book in particular delves into that a little. This book actually, one of the most interesting things about this, And this is the I've enjoyed this book more than all of the other Sunita books. So this is my favourite in the series so far. This book feels like 5 connected short stories, if that makes sense. So in the beginning of the book, we have Hadrian kind of on this expedition, this mission, out to kind of save some missing soldiers, which recalls the story from Tales of the Sunita Volume 1, where he's sent to do the same thing and finds the Cielcin and extrasolarians are now working together, and they have these kind of mechanized Solarian monsters, Cielcin monsters, using extrasolarian tech, which are very cool and scary, and is important for Demon in White. Then after that section, we have the kind of some court intrigue. We then have another mission where Hadrian is kind of sent away from court to... Sorry, my eyes itchy as hell. Sent away from court to kind of fulfill another objective that he personally has that aligns with the Emperor. And then we have this kind of final section where Hadrian is kind of called back to action, as it were, after an extended time away. And I think he's away from the action for hundreds of years, it feels like, in terms of the... Because I'm sure they mentioned that it's going to take over 100 years for them to travel to a place that they go to, because it's so far away. And then there's also, like, you know, travel there, travel back, etc. And the time they spend at this location. Very, very interesting structure. The thing that I liked the most about the structure of this book was because we were going through these kind of... They're not discrete, but these kind of connected, shorter narratives. What I've said before is I think that Ruocchio is at his best with shorter narratives. So I think that The Lesser Devil was previously my favourite thing in the Sunita, and that's the first novella. And then also the short story collection. I thought all of the short stories were really well done and well written. And this kind of takes on that kind of high quality short fiction stuff and just kind of mushes them all together. So we have this fantastic selection of short narratives that all link together, that all make sense, and that kind of carry across themes and storylines. So huge thumbs up from me for the structure of this book. Ruocchio also takes us to lots of different places in this book, so I really like that because we're getting to see more locations, we get to see more technology, we get to see more, kind of more of what's going on with people like the Scholiasts, and more with the kind of politicians on Forum, which is the kind of home planet of the Emperor. We get to meet loads of members of the Imperial family. I think there's like 6 or 7 that we get to meet. One of the Imperial princes, Alexander, becomes a new supporting character in the cast, and the animosity and the relationship of kind of this respect, and then, as I say, animosity, but also this kind of almost fear from Alexander to Hadrian, I think is really well done. I think Alexander is a real MVP as a secondary character in this book, despite not having a huge amount of scenes. Just have a drink. This is a terribly poor video review. I hope that you all go and patronise Hardy's Books and watch their review, because I've watched it and it's very good. Whereas this one is basically me word vomiting out my thoughts on this book that I've just finished. I finished this book literally 20 minutes ago, and I finished it, went and filled up this bottle of water whilst watching Ross from Hardy's Books review, and then came straight into here. So yeah, the book kind of felt like 5 or 6 short stories that kind of come together into a rough 3-act structure. And yeah, I just really, really loved the way that it was written. Really loved the style. Really loved the fact that we kept getting interesting we would get like interesting plot development and interesting action all throughout the book, rather than one of the things that I feel like I've seen with the previous book with Howling Dark was that it felt quite back heavy. So it felt like we got some interesting plot stuff at the beginning and some like world building, and then we didn't really get more development of the story, the kind of the main story, until we met up with Brethren in the Demiurge, and there, or Vugosos, can never remember where anything takes place, until we meet up with Brethren, and then fairly shortly after that is kind of like the big action set piece. And for me, what I liked about this book was that we basically have like openings to kind of short narrative, action set piece. Then there's like this middle with a huge world building set piece, and then at the end we have like another big cool action set piece. And Ruocchio also lets Hadrian be very cool in this book. So Hadrian's obviously been very dramatic, and the way that he's so melodramatic, and the way that he's like, and then the world ended, and like I know that Austin from Tutor Ramble mentioned in their review of Empire of Silence that you could basically play Linkin Park over the end of a lot of the chapters, and it would sound perfect. And A, that's not a bad thing, Austin, but B, that was kind of like the coolest that Hadrian gets to be. Whereas in this book, Hadrian himself does so many super cool things. There's a fantastic duel scene that's around the middle of the book that's just genuinely really excellent and has like some really fun surprises. The action sequence at the end, I absolutely loved it. I think Ruocchio completely nailed it. The way that Hadrian kind of ends the final conflict in the book, and also how that sets him up in opposition to other important characters. Let's talk about characters. So we've talked about how the structure of the book is really excellent for me personally. Might not be your thing, but for me, I loved it. And we've talked about how Hadrian is cool now, or at least does cool things. But let's shift that straight into the characters to talk about Hadrian. So there's been another time jump here. I think that we're like, 100 years after Howling Dark, of which, or 100 waking years after Howling Dark. Lord knows how many actual years. There is a point where Hadrian's like, oh, my dad might be dead, and I haven't even thought about it. Because he's been gone so long and because his father was so old, which I thought was really interesting. One of the big things that I was worried about with Howling Dark was because we had that time jump in Howling Dark, and then we also have had a lot of kind of mini time jumps within books. I was getting worried that we would never see the characters from Devil's Rest again. So like Hadrian's sister, whose name I can't remember, and Crispin, and Jean-Luc, the lad that Crispin befriends in the Catholic town. There's a lot of characters there that I want to see the new legendary Hadrian the Half-Mortal interact with, that we just aren't getting. And it's a real shame. And I had kind of hoped that this coming together with the kind of government and the political leaders of this society, that we might get Hadrian's father. But again, we have no connection back to Devil's Rest yet. And I think that Hadrian also lies to us, by the way, because there's a character that he says, and I never saw this character again. And that character turns up in this book. I haven't gone back to check the specifics of I never saw this character again, but I'm sure that they specifically reference that. And it made me very suspicious of that character throughout their return. I was like, oh, is this, an extrasolarian shape changer or, some sort of imposter of some kind? But that never really came up. Yeah, really enjoyed this book. Character-wise, again, so we have the only characters that really get enough screen time to be important are, I would say, the Emperor, Valka, Polino, and Alexander. So I think the Emperor was another MVP of this book. I think the difference between his imperial visage, his public-facing imperial nature, and then his internal kind of conflict. I really liked that he was not a stereotype, if that makes sense. So you kind of look at the society in which Hadrian lives and how those people live, and then you think like, oh, what must the Emperor be like if this is what society is like? But actually, I felt like the Emperor was very different to what I expected. It really subverted my expectations on that. And you get to see that the Emperor, like all heirs for Palatine families, is chosen. So basically, it depends on the previous Emperor and what they value. So Hadrian's dad has, he's chosen Crispin over Hadrian because Crispin is more violent and less kind of thinky, more doughy, whereas Hadrian's a big thinker. So he chooses Crispin over Hadrian to inherit Devil's Rest in the first book, but then and then you see that, but that's because those are the things that he values. Whereas the Emperor's mother, I believe, is the previous ruling person. She valued the strengths and characteristics that the Emperor has, which I found very interesting. And they talk about how a lot of the princes will not live long enough to be crowned Emperor, so it can't be the eldest son, because the eldest son will likely be dead, will probably die before the Emperor. Which is really interesting. And the Emperor has like 130 children, which I thought was really good. We get to meet a few of those. We get to meet, obviously, Alexander, who is a big part of this book, and his sister Selene, who has a smaller but very interesting role. Valka, obviously, is back in this one. She and Hadrian have been together since Howling Dark, and they've now been, together in a relationship for over 100 years. The fun part is that Hadrian is spending less time in Fugue than Valka is, so he's actually now older than her. So she was the older woman in books 1 and 2, and now Hadrian is older than Valka. And it's quite interesting as well because obviously Palatines have this very extended long lifespan, and a lot of them live 600-700 years. And in fact, we know that Hadrian lives over 1500. I think that he's mentioned in one of the books. So, does Valka have that same level of life extension? Probably not. So there is at some point going to be an old woman and Hadrian. It just depends on how long she spends in Fugue, I guess. She doesn't get much time in this book because she is kind of hidden away a little bit during some of the political intrigue stuff, and there's a lot of that. Though we do get to see her, we do get a really significant character development, I feel, for her kind of towards the beginning of the final arc of the book, which I thought was a really good moment between her and Hadrian about her life's work and in discovering the Quiet and trying to decipher their language and trying to find them, which I thought was really interesting. And then again, yeah, we got Polino, who Polino and Siren and Alara have been raised to patricians by Hadrian. And they get quite a bit of screen time now that they've been made younger, which is quite funny. Siren also gets a decent amount of screen time because there's kind of a big reveal in the middle of the book, which is good. Yeah, it's hard to go through. I mean, I could talk for a long time about how good this book is and how well Ruocchio handles everything from the narration and the perspective of the future Hadrian, which I think is really good, and also the dialogue is fantastic. There's a bunch of dialogue lines that I thought were really, really good. The introduction of this new villain, Doriaika, which I really liked. He's kind of like the Cielcin Emperor almost. And that kind of contrast between the human emperor and the Cielcin one. And also we get a lot of history and backstory of the empire through Hadrian's time on Forum. Basically, the whole book is really well done. And I may as well now tell you guys that I gave this one 5 stars. This is one of the best books I've read this year. I'd have to let this one kind of sink in a bit and think about it versus The Dragon Reborn, which I think is my favourite book I've read of the year, aside from this. Or maybe The Shadow Rising. So The Dragon Reborn was my favourite book of Q1. The Shadow Rising was excellent, and I loved it. And I think I would say it's kind of on a par with this one. And almost, they kind of have a similar kind of world building lore section in the middle as well, actually. But I don't know. So it's this and Shadow Rising are currently neck and neck for Book of the Year, because I do think this is better than The Dragon Reborn, although I laughed more at The Dragon Reborn, and I do like a laugh in a big chunky book. I did laugh a few times in this one. Yeah, it's just great. You don't need me to tell you to read the Sun Eater, because if you're watching this video, you've read at least 2 of them. So you should just keep doing that and keep reading them. I am super looking forward to the next one, which I think is called Kingdoms of Death. And Kingdoms of Death is the split one. So Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man were originally going to be one book, but the publisher refused Ruocchio because it was too long. And so he split the books, which is why this is the only 2 books in the series where there's no time jump. And there's no novellas or short stories in between. But to read that next one, I do need to read Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 2. I'm not going to try and say I'll fit this in this month. I will fit this in this month if I can, but I'm not going to promise anything, because we're already on the 7th and I've only read 1 book. But it was an excellent book, and I'm really happy to have read it, and you should read it too. If you have read Demon in White or any of the previous Sun Eater books and you would like to talk to me about it, then drop down in the comments below and let me know what you thought about the book. If you want to read this book but haven't read it, you should put this to the top of your TBR right now, because the writing, the action, the characters, the story, the world building is awesome. And I think this series is really going from strength to strength. I gave the first book in the series a 3 out of 5, the second book a 4 out of 5, and now a 5 out of 5. So, if anything, this series is improving. So I'm really looking forward to the next one. Drop me a like on this video if you have liked it, and please do subscribe to the channel, because every little subscription helps. Thanks so much for watching, and I will speak to you tomorrow.